Okay, for the audience, we catch up a little bit beforehand, and we were just talking about something very funny, and
Yes. Yes. The art of negotiation, if you will.
Yes, exactly. So, but today we're gonna, I guess, touch on some a really interesting, serious kind of topic, right?
Yes.
You want to
Think
introduce
so.
it? You want to introduce it?
Yeah. So, to those listening, I'll just preface this by saying I was just scrolling through my feed and I realized we're having a conversation with someone else and we were just talking about what we're seeing on the same platform. And I realized our viewpoints are completely different despite having similar interests, despite having similar backgrounds. What our algorithms are feeding us are completely different.
Mhm.
And what we are thinking about, wrestling with, is so challenging. I might get news, cute animals, cooking, some more news, some pop culture stuff,
Mhm.
But even in the news, the way that the news is shared, what we consider to be factual, the perspectives of the way that we're viewing the world and engaging with the world, so completely different.
I mean, fair. I mean, it's really powered by what we press like on, how much time we spend on something. And it's sometimes, something dramatic might catch my eye
Yes.
and I end up watching it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to keep seeing it, but then it's fed to me. And I always
Completely.
wonder, like, what is that doing to me? To reinforcing the things that I like, which, okay, I love cute dogs and babies, right?
Right.
But then also when you get a little bit more serious than dogs and babies, like it's probably reinforcing some of the narratives that I believe, but not necessarily introducing me to opposing point of views for me to think more critically about.
Exactly.
And you have to actively search that stuff out. And social media, at least how I use it, right? I like things given to me, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the most energy efficient dopamine hit we can have.
mhm,
Right? And
you're
so
right.
I think there's something to be said. So, for example, back when I was in undergrad, we hosted a panel, and I forget the topic, but I remember there was an econ professor that we'd invited on the panel. And the way that he saw the world was so different than me. And I remember just boring holes into the side of his head. And I was
Mhm.
just so angry with him. And looking back on it, I realized that that's one, why colleges and universities are such a crucial space, is because you are introduced to ideas that may brush up against how you see the world. And I was able to engage with my own thought, question my own self, my own worldview. And ultimately, I realized that I understood his point. I didn't agree, but I could understand. And I was able to move out of that space of emotion and ego, right? Where I'm just mad at him, right? And I'm just
Right.
boring holes into the side of his face. And how could this man say this? How could this man understand this? And I was able to move into a space to say, okay, well, if I disagree, why? And what facts do I have access to that supports my own argument?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe I'm just now realizing maybe this is also some of what led me into law school. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But because social media is so much more salient now, I think we get less of that because you can block, you can quite literally say not interested. And I'm not saying that we need to understand or agree with every view. There are some views that are just so abhorrent. No, thank you. Right. But we don't get that as often because of how we receive information.
Absolutely. And I think if you go back, so like in high school, for example, you are told pretty much what to think, or at least back when I went to high school. I think
Yep.
now some high schools are a little promote more like critical and creative thinking, or at least, at least some of the private schools do.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So you're told what to think. And then in college, you are invited to think.
Mm,
And I used to say this, and I still believe this. I don't think that college is a place where you go to figure out what you want to do in life, at least not undergrad.
I agree.
It is to think critically, how to learn how to think and learn how to learn.
Yes.
And so you are given that safe space to explore the ideas, to disagree, to come up with your own theories. And that is a really important aspect of how you approach your career and life. And today it's even more important because the world is changing so dramatically in terms of technology and advancements that beyond certain professions, it's really hard to skill specifically for one thing, and maybe also to your detriment to skill specifically for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing that has changed over the past, 8 to 10 years or something is that people used to be closer together. I'm generalizing in their
Sure.
thinking.
Sure.
So, your viewpoint might be here and your viewpoint might be over here, but you kind of met in the middle with some of those things. And it was clear to see how you could do that. It didn't feel as contentious as it does right now. And I feel like people are so far apart that it's hard to bring them back to the middle. And social media doesn't necessarily help with that because it's feeding that one point of view. Whereas, I grew up in a very analog time and, television before even cable, set amount of channels, the news came on at a certain time on a certain channel, and you watch that and everyone got the same information at the same time.
Right.
In pretty much in the same way. How they receive it might be a little bit different, but in the same way. And that's how the world was. And then cable came on, and then you had 24-hour news shows, which I think also
Terrible
is
for your nervous
similar
system.
to social media in a way.
Terrible for your nervous system. No one needs news at
Exactly.
2 a.m.
Exactly. And of course, the newspapers were very popular, right? Again, another vehicle that people got information the same way, and it was a trusted source. And now social media opens up the doors to I can't think of the word, but like a multitude of quote unquote experts.
Right.
And it seems believable because people are very focused on getting their information in this one way instead of what we may traditionally call credible sources.
Right.
And now the question of credibility has come up. Who's credible and who's not?
Yeah. And the ability to have nuance and discourse around the nuance, right?
Yes.
Because now there's a check. Our executive producer she feels very strongly about this.
It's okay. You don't usually get to hear her voice.
I
So
know.
this is a welcome addition.
Yes, she feels very strongly about it. But you'd be able to have moments where you could connect and say, okay, I don't agree with you on these 2 points, but we agree on 6 other points. And therefore, there's enough value in this relationship for us to continue. On social media, you can be canceled or unfollowed because of misstating something, mistakenly misgendering someone, which again, for depending on where you are and how you whatever it is, right? And there's no room or there's less room, I think, for grace because now you can say, I don't have to compromise with this person who disagrees with me. Now I need you to agree with me on all 10 points.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree with me on all 10 points, you are the villain, you are the other, you are my adversary. in a way that is difficult to maintain, because then you're speaking in an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And that, much used phrase, you were quite literally preaching to the choir. And then where do we go from there?
Yeah, and I think too, pre-social media, or your echo chamber, which was much smaller, right? So you had to go outside of it,
Right.
and so therefore, like you said, you had to compromise, and now you don't, because there's all these other people
Yes.
that think like you. So you must be right. You can remain steadfast in your position,
Yep.
and you can just totally be unmovable, and that's not healthy. Because that's not the real world. Because regardless of all these people out there in the ether that agree with you, they may not necessarily live next door or go to your school,
Right.
or be the
Right.
people that you're going to work with. That's your reality. And there's a mix of point of views and experiences that you're closing yourself off from, because you are focused on your social media echo chamber.
Right.
And it doesn't invite critical thinking. I'll say, I just give an example, which is going to be a silly example. The listeners know we love the Real Housewives, right?
Yes.
So, you introduced me to Reddit, which I'm going to never forgive you for.
You're welcome.
Because the problem is with Reddit is that, the issues that I have, let's say on Instagram,
Right.
I haven't been on TikTok in a while because it really just sucks my brain dry, and I need to give it a little space. But the problem with Instagram is that I don't feel like commenting, like the things that I want to say to counter something or whatever is just not the space. But Reddit will give you the safe space to
The
do it.
long form response,
Long
for
form,
sure.
everything. I'm just like,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's very cathartic in that way. But, right, you are also forced to confront opposing points of views on what you're talking about.
Yes.
So, the things that I mostly comment on Reddit are about Real Housewives.
Right.
And so that's pretty much exclusively what it is. And so, I have a point of view about the housewives, or a housewife, right, that I believe. And then something pops up about so-and-so, whatever, and it's the opposite of my point of view. I click on it and I instantly get angry, right? I'm mad that they think differently than me, right? And I'm like, that's so dumb. First of all, it's Real Housewives.
Yeah.
Why are you getting mad? But secondly, let me read this thing and see why they think differently about it. I can agree or not agree, right? Again, this is low stakes because it's Real Housewives, but it's also an indicator of how I need to operate for more serious topics.
Yes.
Right? So I need to be open, which I am. I guess I'm just very specific about housewives sometimes.
Right.
Because it is low stakes. I don't have to be open. But in life, you need to be open to why does that other person think that way? Where did they get that from? Right? You have to say, although I don't agree, but why?
Right.
Where is that coming from?
Yeah. And this is the part that makes advocacy, which many of us are introduced to in these higher education spaces or even in your community, right? There are always going to be advocacy groups, and advocacy groups don't only engage with one another, right? They don't only engage with the people who agree with them. The real change happens when they engage and inform and at times persuade people who either disagree or are ill-informed.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you build consensus.
Yeah.
There's a did you know, right? What's important to you? Let's prioritize what's important to you. And let's figure out how to work together. And I think it's very difficult. And so even with a Reddit, right, you can, I live in the space of conflict. I'm not sure why I chose it, but I did. But I'm fascinated because of the lack of self-awareness that people have. And most people don't know how to argue. Most people don't know how to disagree. Most people don't understand how to engage in conflict in any way that is productive. We push it away and we'll say, I don't agree with them. They're blocked. So we don't get to question, is there a logical fallacy that they're operating with? Is this a straw man argument? Are they truly arguing in good faith, or are they, and now we have to deal with, right? Are they trolling? Is this false information? And the other issue with social media that I see happening from a generational perspective is that we have older generations that are more susceptible to manipulation through social media because they don't have any sort of updated digital media literacy.
Right.
So you can put out a photo that's AI, where the person has maybe 8 fingers, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, this is real. This is happening." And you're like, "Okay, well, this person doesn't notice that they don't have they don't have,
Mm-hmm.
5 fingers like they normally do in these Getty images. Other things are happening. This is actually not a real photo." Or the person that you're arguing with is a bot.
Right. Which
And
is,
it was quite literally designed to stoke dissension and anger and all of these feelings. And I'm sure there are spaces, but I don't come across them often. So that's my own research that I think I should do. But my question is, how can we increase this? How can we increase this media literacy for really every generation?
I mean, it's a really great question, because I mean, just even adding to the, AI with 8 fingers, people can just Photoshop existing things look real.
Yep.
And you have to always question, is this real? I find myself doing that all the time. Is this real? Like, can I really believe this story?
Right.
And
Right.
we have to stop relying on clips of information. We do need full context.
Yes.
Right? We absolutely need full context. And that's what's missing from, the majority of these dialogues is, where did this come from, really?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And why did this person say this thing? And the why is big, right? It's not our interpretation of the why. It is really the full context of the why. And also citing sources, because one of the things that social posts don't do well is answering those questions.
Correct.
They'll put up a, controversial quote, and, for clicks and comments, they may even say who said it, but can you find the source to go validate yourself for the people who are more intellectually curious about the context? No. So the barrier is high, on purpose. Right. And that's what's very, very irritating. And then it stokes that conflict. One thing that you talked about conflict, but I think the other thing that I think people don't realize is that, they engage in conflict every single day. It doesn't have to be, right, negative or tense conflict. Like, you engage in conflict with yourself. Like, what am I going to do this morning? Like, or do you feel guilty about what you did or did not do? And you negotiate those conversations with yourself, and even with a family member. Like, what are we going to eat for dinner? Like, those things are, you're having a conversation about what I should and what I should not do and how to meet in the middle. And so you are practicing it. You just don't know how to externalize it and call it what it is, because conflict is always viewed as, I'm fighting with you about something, right?
Yes.
Right? Like you've talked about, it's a difference between what two people want, but it can also be the difference between what you think you want and what you should want for yourself as well.
Exactly.
And if you kind of reframe it, then you realize, I have some of these skills. Right? I just need to externalize them and deal with them a little bit differently. I think the part about conflict that is truly challenging is the conversation around it. Right? So there's the conflict and there's the difficult conversations, and that's when people get uncomfortable. And they need to get more comfortable with that. And also, people need to get really comfortable with that feedback. So it's a give and take. Like, I had a conversation the other day someone reached out to me, and I didn't know them. She didn't know me, but we're in the same organization. And she wanted to ask me a question about something I had done, but she didn't know how to do it because it was a conflict.
Okay.
Right. And she didn't know how to do it, but I could tell that she wanted to ask me something.
Right.
And she was uncomfortable. So I'm a person who, I want you to ask me. Let's deal with it. And so I tried to create the space for her to do it. She doesn't know me, so give her a little bit of my personality.
Sure.
In an open and friendly way. And then, say, hey, so what is it you want to talk about? And she said, I really didn't know how to bring up this conversation. So she asked me the question, talked a little bit about it. She's like, I was really nervous about the conversation, but you just made it easy. I'm like, yeah, I was like, yeah, I did it. Okay.
Right.
Here's why I did it. Here's the context for why I did it. Right. And you know what else I did? I said, and I'm sorry if it created conflict for you, but let's try to solve this together. Right. I'll do this part because this is what I did, and I can correct that. And then you do this part, and it could have been completely contentious.
Right. You could have come in defensive. You could have just stonewalled and made it difficult and shut down the opportunity to connect.
Right.
But you didn't, because
we need to meet in the middle. Right.
Right.
I know I do. I said this other person, I had this phone call with someone, I want to resolve the conflict. And they were like, no, it's not going to work. Because they're not going to meet you. They're not going to receive the feedback.
Right.
And that was really interesting too. You have to know your opposing party. But all that to say, right, that the tricky part about developing the media literacy is that the feedback mechanism is really not there.
Yes.
You're really by yourself in looking at the content and trying to understand. But you have to develop your critical thinking skills and your curiosity, which I know is your favorite word, right?
And my favorite values.
Hold up. Is this all there is to this?
Right.
Should I do more?
Right.
And should I do more research or due diligence before I repeat it or share it? Right? And I'm talking about sharing it like, I know you're going to share stuff with your friends and family that you don't vet and talk crap about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
strangers who follow you.
Exactly. You have to be more thoughtful.
Totally. This past week, I was with a client on site. We played a game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm big in using play to teach lessons.
Yeah.
But I split them in half. I took half of the people out of the room. And so the first half, there were people, they were very proudly number ones.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you are going to make a request and you are not going to stop advocating for that request until you get it. I can do that. I'm in a leadership role. I can do, we're going to do it. I said, fantastic. The second group, I said, they are going to make a request of you. No matter what they request, you tell them yes, but there's no way that's possible. Mm-hmm. And you can use some iteration of it, but I always want you to use yes, but. Mm-hmm. And when they hit their peak, and you will know what that looks like, then I want you to switch to saying yes and add something onto their request. Mm-hmm. The number of people who got out of their seat, walked away, slammed their pen down. These are again completely hypothetical requests. It was up to them. It could be, I need your pen, or Karen, can you give me a call? Yes, but not today. That's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Yes, but I don't really know when we're going to speak. Yes, but my phone is broken. Whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And the goal is to teach what resistance feels like and looks like, and what acceptance looks like. Because once they hit that emotional peak where they're completely frustrated, once the person turns to yes and, some of them don't even want what they were requesting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the person's saying, yes, I can give you a call. And you know what? I'll come and see you and we'll have lunch. I don't want to go anymore. Completely, they completely forgot the assignment. And I just want us to be mindful of what resistance looks like, what we're resisting against, and acceptance, and what we can accept, what it looks like to accept something.
Mm-hmm.
Because very often we can't keep what our request is because we're so focused on the resistance. We're so focused on our emotional, lack of emotional management, lack of emotional professionalism in the moment. But some people were so grateful for the yes and because of all of the resistance that they'd encountered up until that point.
So interesting. And I
It is
wonder if, I wonder if that's like also based on personality and obviously experience,
Yes.
right? So if you are so used to getting a no and you're used to it and you expect it, then you might be more grateful for the eventual yes and
Right.
versus if you're not used to getting it, right? That throws you in a tizzy.
Yep.
Right? And it doesn't even matter
Exactly.
if someone's going to acquiesce later. I just wonder, like, I feel like there's so many layers.
There are so many layers. I mean, we could talk more about it, but there are a lot of senior people who were in the first group. They were number one. And they're so used to using their seniority and their experience and their leverage. And they know how. I had one woman, she said, I always get what I want. I know how to negotiate a salary. I'm going to talk about salary because I know how to get a salary. And the situational positioning left her, in her version, she felt powerless.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I took a negotiation class and I kind of signed up for it last minute. So I was mortified to know that I actually had to negotiate with real people like every week. It's like, who knew? I mean, it totally makes sense, but I obviously wasn't paying attention. So, but what was interesting is I walked in thinking that I wasn't a good negotiator. Right. So that was my starting point. And so in thinking that though, it made me very open to learning how to be a better negotiator. Right. And so it allowed me to soak up the knowledge. And then I had to actually practice it, which was oddly nerve-wracking. Right. Because I'm like, these aren't real negotiations. Right. But what we did know as students was something similar to what you talked about is like, this is what you need to get out of it, right? You don't know what the other person needs to get out of it. And there's like point system and stuff like that. It enabled compromise though, to some degree. But then it also talked about not just the mechanics of negotiation, but the sentiments behind it, like the personality and why people do what they do. And what I realized is that that's where my superpower lies, right? It's not in the mechanics. I get caught up in that.
Sure.
But it's more like if people like you, generally speaking, right, they're more willing to help and reach a compromise, whatever the case may be. And so I would always take some time to develop the rapport first and then try to get to where I needed to go.
You're a natural marketer. Let me make this.
Maybe that's it. Now, I don't think that I'm the primo negotiator. So you had some people, though, that just like that woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Boom,
boom, boom. And listen, in some cases, that works, right? Because it depends on what the goals are. And at the end of the day, what you said was you have to focus on what you need to achieve and take the emotions out of it. So even in my building a rapport, I'm actually building emotions into it.
Right.
And sometimes emotions need to be taken completely out of it.
Right.
So you focus on the core thing. So yeah, it's an interesting interpersonal dynamic.
It is. It is. The next time I see you, we'll have to figure out some sort of situation for it to make sense to play because I'm endlessly fascinated by creating this environment to examine human behavior. But
But you can also see it though in the social, right? So like when you're commenting and people are going back and forth,
Yes.
that is their attempt to negotiate a new way of thinking.
Correct.
And
Or a
most
new
times
way for you to entertain them. Right,
well,
to
there's
give the
that too.
feedback to say if they're depending on how they're looking at it, the value that you're providing. If you're informing them, they now say, okay, well, I would like for you to inform me this way, or I would like for you to speak about these things specifically.
Yep.
If it is a means of entertainment, I need for you to talk about X part of your life. I need for you to show us this, right? And so we're increasingly voyeuristic.
Yeah.
While also being increasingly disconnected, which is interesting.
So interesting, right?
Yeah. Tell me everything about your life while I hide behind this random.
Exactly. Yeah. And say all sorts of things about your life without full context. Without full
context. Yes. Yes. Don't make it too long. In 10 minutes or less, tell me everything that I need to know about.
Yeah.
You
and you know, it's interesting, particularly in the comments, right? When I'm not caught up. Sometimes I'm just sitting there, I'm like, wait a second. How do you know that? How do you, random commenter, know more about that situation than I do, right? And sometimes someone will say something like, I'm like, that's, I don't know, intriguing or maybe even salacious, right? Sure. And I'm like, oh, is that true? Right? Yeah. And then I go searching because I want more information in depth, right? And I can't find it. Or I find something and it's pretty pedestrian, right? It's not really what they said. Right? So that's not really true. But this post has like a zillion comments on it and people are like just blowing that up and it just is perpetuating the narrative. And it actually makes me think of the whole Hollywood controversy with the movie This Ends With Us. It Ends With Us with Blake Lively and Jason Baldoni. And for the listeners, so what's alleged is that Baldoni's group went on a smear campaign in social media to smear Blake Lively. And I don't know if that's true or not. However, I see how easily it could happen because you just place these things with the right people and nobody goes any deeper than what's right in front of them.
Wow.
I don't know how you counter that. And I think that social media is, for lack of a better term, it's just making us dumber. I don't want to call people dumb. I really don't. But I know for me that when I go deeper, I learn so much more. And when I don't, I really know nothing.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people are getting their information just from that one source. I mean, in school, we're taught to cite various different sources.
That's true.
And then we don't.
That's true. Oh my goodness. Well,
we haven't solved the media literacy problem.
Not yet. We're close.
I mean, we told people what to do.
We did. Right? We just need to provide some sources.
Oh, there you go. They should just listen to us.
But if you're interested, we are a great starting point, I must say.
We are, but we also provide continued learning resources for every episode. So you can dive deeper into what we're saying and formulate your own opinion.
Very true.
Yeah, so we practice what we preach. Right, Mina?
We practice what we preach. She's much more satisfied. And
she was not
for a nap.
In the director's seat.
Right. That was the problem. That was my mistake. To listeners, my apologies. I did not have her in her director's chair, and for that I apologize.
There we go. So we know for next time. Yep. All right, Brittany, until next time. Bye.